Namaste. All right, hello everyone. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about the mundane astrology for 2025, and I'm going to read the Lunar New Year chart. So, if you've watched my channel for some years, you know that I'm very big on this Lunar New Year chart. This is the new year for Asia, um, and in mundane astrology, this chart works really well. Um, You can go back to previous videos where I've talked about that. And when it was during the pandemic, I started to get a lot more into mundane astrology, and I found that the lunar new year charts really worked a lot better than um, a lot of the other techniques people use, like the Aries ingress or things like that. And then, of course, you never want to make the classic mistake of like trying to read the birth chart of a country, which is so common in pop culture right now. Like, reading the chart for USA, it would be like reading the chart of July 4th, 1776. And then no one even really knows exactly when the Declaration of Independence was signed. So we don't even, there's these different ideas about that chart, but that's just a waste of time. I'm here to tell you that. Just save yourself time and don't bother with that because that's not what any of the ancients ever did. There's no birth chart for the land. The land's just always been there. You can't just, it's just not logical. It's not the actual traditional practice of astrologers in any ancient tradition. It can tell you about governmental issues, but what you really want to do is you want to create the chart for the capital of the city of the country you're in, and for different things, like for the moment the sun enters Aries, that's the Aries ingress chart. For this, we're doing it for the Lunar New Year, and I'm calculating the chart of the United States. So this is reading the mundane astrology for the United States for the next year, but it will have a big impact on the world because the United States is kind of like the Rome of ancient times. And what happens with this country has a big impact on every other country. But a lot of you guys are watching from other countries. And so if you want to calculate the Lunar New Year chart for your country, calculate this same chart, but for your capital city. And the chart is basically the second new moon after the winter solstice. And you have to calculate that tropically as well. Okay, so when it comes to this year's Lunar New Year chart, um, all right, we have, I hope you guys can see this up here. This is Aquarius rising. So right off the bat is a fixed sign. So a lot of things will just stay the same because it's a fixed sign. But we see that Sun and Moon and Mercury are in the ascendant. Sun and Moon and Mercury are all in Shravana and Nakshatra. But the that will always be happening because the lunar New Year chart will always have the Sun and Moon conjunct in Shravana in this yuga. What is unique is what will be rising. And so if you calculated this chart for China, it would have the opposite rising sign, or whatever was the opposite side of the planet, it would have Leo rising. So right off the bat, what's interesting is that this is Aquarius rising with Sun in the ascendant. So the seventh Lord, the Lord of other nations and other countries, is in our first house. So you see right away, we're going to be making other countries focus on us more, and we're going to be less focused on other countries, which, depending on who you ask, is a good thing. Which, for us as a country, it's a good thing because if you go back and look at the videos I did on the pandemic and the Lunar New Year charts of that, it was like our country was focusing way too much on a lot of other nations, a lot of other problems, and sending a lot of money to other countries and things like that. This is showing the opposite. And that's what's so interesting is there's been so many new governmental changes, this new administration is much more nationalistic and focused on its own nation and um, solving those problems. So that really just makes so much sense here. The other thing is that the Lord of it, Lord of Aquarius, is Saturn. The Lagnesh of this chart is thus going to the second house of Pisces. So it's showing that as a nation, we are going to be focusing on our own resources more this time or this year. We're going to be focusing on our economy, our needs, our resources, and fixing and purifying and, basically reorganizing and restructuring those things with Rahu there. And Rahu in the second is basically showing like, whoa, this is really, really important at this point for the USA to fix its economy. And yeah, anyone who's lived in America and watched how absurd the inflation has been over the last 4 years can't really deny that. Pineapples were the same price for like 30 years, and then in 4 years, it went up twice the price. So that's pretty insane. Um, okay, so that is really interesting how, we have this focus on the second house and our needs and our budget. And Saturn is being delighted by an exalted Venus. So that's one very good thing. But what's funny is that Saturn is shaming Venus. Whenever, if you know the Lajitadi Avastas, whenever a planet is with Saturn and Rahu, it's ashamed. So Venus is exalted and at the same time in the ashamed, the Lajita Vashta. So Venus is feeling exalted and yet ashamed at the same time. Um, how funny is it that on day one of the new administration, uh, I'm just calling him President T because it's a lot easier for the algorithm. T basically took away a lot of people's genders. He basically declared that there were only two genders, and that I'm sure was something that shamed a very large amount of people in the country. Um, but Venus exalted means that it's not actually those people are, it's only a subjective type of shame, and those people will still be fine if they're not too let's say subjectively affected by it, because the Lajita Vashtas kind of had to do more with your subjective internal states, not so much concretely what is really happening. And that's what's interesting too, is this exalted Venus shows that concretely we are going to improve our economy tremendously this year, but through some shameful activities, most likely, or some things that will shame others, we might say. Um, So the other interesting thing is that these planets are all in the Bhadrapadas. Purva Bhadrapada is where the Lagna Lord is, and Uttara Bhadrapada is where Venus is and Rahu is. Uh, there's a lot of things I want to say about this. One thing is these Bhadrapadas are very destructive, and you know, Purva Bhadrapada, having the Lagna Lord in Purva Bhadrapada in the second house means we are going to be that's a cruel and violent nakshatra. So this president is going to be doing some cruel and violent things and destroy and transform a lot of things in the United States. Uh, and it will be mixed. It will be good in some ways, but because of the exalted Venus, but bad in other ways because of the shame of Ashta. And that's as far as specific as I want to get on that for this moment. Now, the other wild thing, though, about this whole conjunction is this is where you've probably seen this rise of like religious fervor and religious fanaticism. And like I said in my Patreon forecast, for the Patreon members, like there's a major holy war kind of theme going on with the astrology this year. And that is concerning. And there's a lot more of a theme of, like terrorism or religious terrorism or doing negative karmic things because of one's beliefs. And this is seen by the water signs being really afflicted with Rahu and Saturn in Pisces and Mars in Cancer. The water signs are the Brahmin signs, the signs of the priestly caste, and the signs of our faith and religion. Rahu moving into Pisces this year means a lot of people are going to get more focused on their faith and their beliefs, and that's great. But the thing with Saturn and Venus there again is showing some people are going to be doing that out of a very like deceived, very clouded, very insincere intention. Other people are going to have the purest of intentions with that exalted Venus there. Um, And I can't make a statement for everyone in the country, of course, like that. But it's interesting because I've noticed even on my social media or just friends around lately, it seems like so many more people are getting baptized or going to church and this and that. But these are the kind, I don't want to be disrespectful, but a lot of these people are the kind of people who are just sort of wishy-washy, floaty people with undefined sacral chakras who never really know what they believe and just kind of like go with what's cool. And they were into yoga and jyotish when that's cool, or they're into this when this is cool. And so I don't know if those people are going to get that much benefit because again, just are you really going to stick to this belief or is this just going to be a phase, because God's not impressed by little phases. So if you're one of these people who's really focusing on your faith more, that's wonderful. But my advice is just make sure you're coming from that heart state and not this Saturnian complex of fears and social insecurities or weird things or this or that. I mean, if everybody became Christian, it would be very, people like us would be very uncomfortable and, you know, kind of like what Christians were in the old days where they had to hide their faith and just draw a fish sign and these sorts of things. That's like how we would have to be now. Um, I just want to say that, yeah, there's a lot more likelihood of this sort of religious fanaticism and people with unclear and undefined religious beliefs with that Rahu and Saturn and Pisces. Uh, and some of them are going to work on that in a healthy way, and others are just going to try to shame people because it's easier than addressing their own real beliefs. And that's the thing is if your faith is solid, nothing anyone else does should really affect you or that faith. And it's only when your faith begins to start to flicker that you get fanatical. So that's a good sign to just avoid those people. Um, okay, so yeah, so we've got this theme of holy war, this fog of war. There's been this mysterious fog that a lot of people have been seeing around the world. This is all signs of Pisces, and in some ways an unhealthy aspect of Pisces with Saturn and Venus there, or Saturn and Rahu there. But then there's the Mars debilitated in Pushya. Pushya is the star of the priest, Brihaspati. It's the star of worship, star of the fire sacrifice and rituals and prayer. So Mars debilitated here is showing that there's a lot of, again, this unhealthy intentions, you could say, and anger and things behind people's beliefs. And they're, like, so yeah, if you're praying, pray for the highest good of everyone everywhere and try not to pray for just your own petty, like, let me beat the guy and let me win. And, these sorts of things that the masses always try to pray for those sorts of things when you really should try to pray to go beyond those needs and pray for moksha and pray for the highest good of yourself and others. But yeah, basically this Mars debilitated in Cancer and in Pushya Nakshatra kind of shows people getting worked up and creating bad blood and creating bad emotional states over their faith when they could just be practicing it more, and that's the one wonderful thing we can do as yogis is we have and Hindu type people is it's not we don't have to just take some priest's word for it. We can go and practice yoga and do things and actually experience the change and then not feel the need to project and preach our own insecurities onto others, right? Because we're working through these things and we're actually experiencing internal states of emotional bliss and very high emotional states. Enlightened yogis experience the most blissful, ecstatic inner emotional states. And it's these water signs, these emotional signs. These are the priestly signs. That's what they're connected to. Um, we're also going to be seeing a lot of extremes with the fire and water element as a result of this, which we've already been seeing. The wildfires in California and all these other things have to do with this debilitated Mars and this irregular fire element going on. What's also interesting is that there's no planets and fire signs in this chart. There's just this big emphasis on water and air. So there's a real imbalance here going on. The thing with Mars in the sixth is weird because it's debilitated. So sometimes that can make you really good at solving problems and being really on top of it. But then if it's debilitated, that can make you just completely avoid all problems and want to be very passive. And I think in this case, what it's really speaking to is, well, I mean, this is for the whole country, so it will probably have both effects in different ways. But the Lord of this Mars is the moon, and it's in the first house. So again, it's showing we're focusing on our domestic issues this year as a country. The USA, that sixth Lord is in the first, focusing on its own problems, which is good, really. And this is interesting too, because, um, well, it's interesting for a few different angles, but the seventh Lord again, Leo in the ascendant, and then the sixth Lord, which has to do with servants, and service and things like that, is in the ascendant. Um, let me put this another way. The sixth house is your service, but your third house, the third house has to do with your servants for a country. So I'm just now realizing this as I'm reading the chart. The third Lord, Aries, is debilitated in the sixth house. So that has to do with the immigration crisis. We're debilitating our servants, essentially, the immigrants of the country who pick our crops and things. They're debilitated and they're in the sixth house and they're just like getting lost. And separating from this exalted Venus, I'm now noticing too. So that makes a lot of sense. They're separating from their own money and their exalted, luxurious life in America, and they're getting sent back. Sorry, I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but I'm just seeing this in the moment right now. Um, the other crazy thing is that Venus rules the third cusp. So from another angle, Venus represents these servants. And again, they're exalted but ashamed right now. So they're probably way wealthier than the rest of their family from working in America, but they're ashamed. And there's a big change going on right now with this. Um, so that does make sense. And then another interesting thing is when we're on this topic of immigration, the 11th house has to do with immigration and your visas. I've had a lot of experience with Indians and visas and stuff like this. So if you just want to know what that has to do with, that's the 11th house. Your title, an impersonal group stamping you and saying you're a citizen or you're not, or this or that. Well, what's interesting is the 11th Lord is in the fifth. Fifth house is showing like, okay, we're creating a new order here, a new regime. The fifth house, like I went really deep on this in my numbers class, in that numbers mini course I taught in the nakshatra course. But like the fifth house, the number 5 deals with the maintenance and the order of creation, the constant updating and changing of things to keep equilibrium in creation. So this 11th Lord in the fifth is showing this big emphasis on this administration, on these factors of like creating an entirely new order that deals with basically who is a legal immigrant and who is not. And there's just let's just say there's going to be a lot of talk about visas and this sort of status this year. We could also just say that in a simple sense. Jupiter is retrograde. So he has some strength, but he's also starved. So no way everybody's going to be happy with that. It's going to have a mixed result. Some people will be happy with it, some won't be. One good remedy for this Mars, if you've got a debilitated Mars, or if you've got a Mars in the sixth, or any sort of Mars issue you're trying to work on, it could be good to donate blood because Mars is in Cancer, the sign of the blood. So that's one option. And also to eat foods that are really good for building healthy blood, like greens and lettuce and having that healthy salt mineral type of taste. Bitter greens, things like that. Now, there's a lot of again, this debilitating Pushya nakshatra shows that cultural pride that's kind of messing up a lot. This would be interesting to look at different countries and their lunar new year charts and see where that Mars and Pushya is falling and how it will or will not screw up the country because of their cultural pride, we could say, and getting emotionally inflamed and creating enmity and wanting to fight, or at the most furthest extreme, religious terrorism or war. But what's also interesting is I noticed a lot of the nakshatras that the planets are in fixed and firm nakshatras, and it's a fixed sign. So a lot of what happens this year might have very long-lasting results. Um, and so that's interesting. But then this is just one angle of the mundane astrology. If I was actually being hired by nations or very important people to predict things, I would be doing a lot more than reading just this chart. And I would be reading it for other important countries as well. And so this is just one outlook, but I think it already, as you can probably hopefully tell, let me know in the comments if this makes sense. But there's a lot of themes of this chart that make perfect sense. But what's coming up, Saturn will get debilitated in Aries. That can be a really tough time just on the mundane astrology in general. Some of the worst wars break out when Saturn is in Aries, some of the worst like winters, famines, diseases, pandemics, you name it. It's like the entire ability to buffer all the negative karma of existence is at its lowest point then. So, yeah, gather your nuts and study and learn as much as you can to prepare for that now and harvest what you can because it could be a very difficult time coming up for some people in some countries. Uh, Hopefully not. But we also will have Jupiter exalted, and that will buffer a lot of things for that year as well. So we'll just have to wait and see. Okay, thanks you guys. Thanks to all the patrons who have been supporting me. I've got more patrons joining, and I really appreciate that. And remember, this is just a sample. So if you like astrology and you want to go deeper, I definitely suggest studying with me on Patreon. It's $33 a month to study the Vedic astrology and to get access to all of my jyotish courses. Plus, you get a free monthly forecast on the 12 lagnas. It's like 3 or 4 minutes for each lagna. And then you also get discounted tutoring. So you can do one-on-one tutoring with me at a discounted fee. And that's when you really become a really good astrologer. And then I've also got the financial astrology for $44 a month. You can sign up for that, and then you get a free monthly crypto update. And then if you want both, you can join the premium level for $55 a month. All right. Thanks, you guys. Take care.